In this episode, we're meeting with John Bird, the founder of The Big Issue. John, I understand that you're a poet. What would you say is your most poignant line?
God. Well, I wrote a poem when I was 18. I'd just come out of a boys' prison, and it's a 2-line poem. It goes, or 4-line, I think. Yeah. It goes, will I find this thing well known in loveless legs stretched wide, or will I find this thing well known on the cool hillside? And it was a reference, do I get lost in sex, or do I go for importance, get caught up in, justice and all those sorts of things? And I was asking me those questions at 18, and it's surprising because I wasn't doing a lot of very useful things for myself and the world at that age, but I was writing poetry anyway.
And obviously you took the path of importance.
Yeah, I mean, by default, there was never any plan. I think I stumbled into being useful, largely because I'd come from so much poverty and crime myself, that when I got out, I thought, hang on, if I can get out, other people can get out. So I started to be useful to people who were other than my immediate family. So in the end, I became a very useful person.
Can you tell us about your life of poverty and crime and your young years with your parents?
Well, I was born to a kind of London Irish family in Notting Hill just after the Second World War. We immediately ran into problems. My parents we were living in this slummy part of London. There was, rats and dirt and rubbish, and there was a lot of violence. My father was very violent to my mother. Lots of drunkenness. Poor living and poor thinking. We were made homeless when I was 5. Eventually we were taken into a Catholic orphanage and brought up by the nuns, which wasn't a particularly good experience because they had all of these failed children from the cities, and there was a lot of aggression around there. Then I came out of that. We'd moved to Chelsea in the Fulham area, another part of London, and then started to get into trouble with the police, shoplifting, stealing cars, housebreaking, and really not going to school and fighting the teachers when I did go. Yep. So I was a real one of those kind of kids that there's a lot more of them now, who are kind of outside of society, and I was hard work, and I was costing everybody an enormous amount of money because they kept having to put me away, and that went on for quite a few years, and eventually in my late 20s and early 30s I got myself straightened out. But a lot of it was to do with the way the adults in my life had treated me when I was born.
Yep. How many siblings did you have, and did they lead a life of crime as well as imprisonment also?
Well, I had 5 brothers, and none of them really ever got into the kind of trouble I did.
Yep.
I think I was very fortunate because of that, every time I got nicked, put in a place, yep, I learned something new. Mm-hmm. So I learned how to read and write when I was in a boys' prison.
Right.
I learned, took an interest in music, in jazz, because there were prison officers who had an interest in music, so I took an interest in music. And there were all sorts of opportunities because they believed in the prison system that what was important was that you went in bad and came out better.
Yep.
Not just warehoused you. So I was very, very fortunate that the prison system did work for reform then, for redemption, and of course now it doesn't.
Let's talk about your crimes though. You're known to be a petty thief, but what was the most valuable item that you ever stole?
Oh God, I was never in it for the money. I was in it for the grief. I mean, like burning down old buildings. I never burnt down new buildings. I think the most expensive thing I ever stole was, some camera equipment, which was probably worth, then about £50,
Right.
probably now worth 1,000. So I was just a niggle. I was annoying. I was a grief causer, just caused problems. So I was just, one of those kind of antisocial children and young men.
How about any internal sort of conflicts you may have had? And did you face alcoholism as well as drug-related problems?
I did get... I've always had a problem with drink, and I still have a problem with drink. I mean, I don't drink too much because I get into trouble, even at my age. I took a lot of drugs, but was one of those persons who never got addicted. I smoked a lot of wacky-backy. I took trips and even tried heroin and all those sorts of things. I couldn't really handle that, and one of the big things that I took a lot of was cocaine and things like that.
Okay.
But I didn't seem to be the kind of person who became reliant on it. I was more reliant on drink. And that might be because I'm a very sociable person.
Yep.
And when you're drinking, you are
It's a social pursuit.
in a social situation nearly always.
What would you say saved your life? What was that turning point?
It's not fashionable to say, but I was saved by politics, because when I was 21, I left London because the police were looking for me for quite a number of misdemeanors, small crimes. And I went off to Paris, and I went there as a little small-minded, racist, hated black people, Jews, Indians, Arabs, and all that stuff, because that's what I was taught as a boy to believe in, and ended up becoming a Marxist, actually.
Right.
And joined a revolutionary organisation who kind of got rid of all my hatred and explained to me that all I was some kind of little fool running around with all these poisoned ideas.
Marxist in ideology or Marxist in...
It was really more, I don't think, it was more like a kind of club. Because what it was a kind of religion in another way. And what they tried to do is they tried to turn you into a kind of internationalist. That meant you didn't see the division between class and race and all that sort of stuff. So they did a pretty good job. I mean, I eventually fell out with them because I didn't like the politics that went with it.
Yep.
But they played a very, very important part in my life, which was get rid of all that poison that I'd had really from childhood, where I couldn't talk to black people, I couldn't talk to Jews, I couldn't talk to all sorts of people without feeling them as being below me, So that was a major change.
Was that quite characteristic of the times of your life?
It was. It was very characteristic of virtually everybody within the section of society that I came from, which is, they call it the working class, but I would say it was more like the underclass. The semi-criminal, badly behaved people who really were not responding to the post-war opportunities that were opening up to a lot of people. We were uneducated, we were always in trouble, and we had all these horrible ideas about other people.
Yeah. So you've spent an enormous part of your life devoted to the homeless, and to put the situation into perspective, I guess many people out there have a very suspiciously sympathetic view of the homeless, and if I give the homeless a quid or two, then it's going to go into alcohol or drugs. And what's your take on this?
Well, I take a different attitude to almost anybody else. I started the big issue because I was noticing the fact that there were a lot of people with drink and drug problems who were stealing in order to feed their habits.
Yep.
So they were not only having the habits and the problems, added to that was the fact that they were being criminal to feed those habits. A guy I knew had a £400 a day habit. He was causing havoc in getting that £400. He'd rob anybody. So if I could address a part of his problem and get him to earn maybe £100 a day, so it meant he had to do less crime. So my idea was to be a crime prevention program. So if somebody buys the big issue and gives somebody the money, and that person then goes and buys drugs, it may not be the best thing in the world for them,
right,
but at least they're not going to rob your mother to feed their habits. So that, to me, is the first step. The next step, of course, is that you then have to try and get them out of the things that they're doing against themselves. But that is a lot longer. The first thing is just stop them committing crime.
Yep.
And that's why virtually every police department I've ever worked with have always said we were one of the best crime reduction programs in our cities.
So John, as we walk and travel through the streets of London as well as New York and Sydney and Tokyo, and we see all these homeless people around us, a really strong public perception has developed of homeless people. And if you may allow me to just read a quote that I pulled out from a web forum about homeless people. Do you know what I despise? Homeless people. What a waste of space. Everyone else seems to be getting on with it, but these pitiful people decide that sitting on the streets will contribute to society. Homeless people with dogs, this is tragic, poor animal. It is not our job to feed these lazy people. So I guess the sentiment from there is that people are fed up. People feel that homeless people are really sponging off society. You can sense that there is not only pity, but there is anger towards the homeless people. How do you feel about that, John?
You know, as long as they don't take up arms against the homeless or attack them, you know, let people have whatever opinion they want. I think there's a number of reasons why people are on the streets. And that's one of the tragedies, is that people's lives do fall apart, and they end up on the streets, and then they become an eyesore to people like the person you just described. But the other thing is, and this is the biggest tragedy, is it's not so much, they're not the real problem. The real problem are the people who keep the homeless on the streets by continuously giving them handouts, and giving them reasons to stay on the streets, and giving them reasons to come back. When I was on the streets and I was a beggar, I used to hate the people who didn't give me any money, and I loathed the people who gave me money, because it plays with your mind. And I know people who are still on the streets because they can earn their money on the streets. If they couldn't have earned their money on the streets because of these well-intentioned people, they'd have had to face up to not being able to earn their money that way, and they may have moved on to something better or even worse. But the point is that what that person is saying is just a kind of spiteful, ignorant, doesn't really understand the world, but they're not the harm. The biggest harm, as I said, are the people who say, I can't walk past a homeless person without helping them, and then they give them something, and they actually give them a reason to stay on the streets. That, I think, is the biggest tragedy.
Which goes back to the concept of a hand up versus a hand out. Would you be able to elaborate on that, please, John?
Yeah, we weren't the first ones to come up with this, or if there was a lot of people coming up with this idea that if you gave somebody a handout, you kept them reliant forever on the handout, because handouts don't accumulate into opportunity. But if you give them a hand up, that means you pull them up from the surface of the streets, and you pull them into a situation where they can start influencing their lives in a better way. They can face up to the drink problems or the drug problems or the personality problems that have brought them onto the streets. So a hand up is a wonderful thing that we do it to our children, we do it to our brothers and sisters, we do it to our friends. Why can't we do it to the homeless? The reason we should do it to the homeless is because then we can endorse our own humanity, which I think it needs constantly to be endorsed, because otherwise we just end up thinking about ourselves. But the other thing is it makes good economic sense, because the longer people stay on the streets, the more they start using our hospital system, more they get drawn into the prison system, the more they get involved in social collapse, then what actually happens is that costs a lot more than if you do a very little hand up, not a handout at some stage.
Can you talk to us about the fateful date when you met Gordon Roddick as well as the late Dame Annita Roddick?
Well, I first met Gordon Roddick. I was on the run from the police. I'd just left Paris and I'd come to Edinburgh.
Yep.
I was living in Edinburgh. I had a few girlfriends because that was the kind of horrible person I was. I was living off my girlfriends. And I was in a pub one night. I remember it was the 23rd of December 1967. And I was in a pub with a lot of my mates because we were all little semi-petty criminals. My specialism for earning money was smashing windows and stealing antiques. And I was in the pub spending some of my ill-gotten gains. Mm-hmm. And this big Scots guy came in with his mates, and they all looked very middle class and very posh. And we were the kind of underclass, and we wanted to give them a good kicking and throw them out. And but then I heard Gordon. I had a broken nose. I've had many broken noses, but my nose was a bit more broken at the time, and he was saying something about my nose, how it was broken and all that stuff, and I called him, insulted him, and we insulted each other, and then I said, what do you do? And he says, I write poetry. And I said, oh God, I write poetry. I said, I bet my rubbish poems are better than yours. So we started talking about poetry, and he really did write a load of rubbish, even more rubbish than me. And we became friends, and I saw him for about a year, and then towards the end of the year we'd moved from Scotland I'd moved back to London, and he'd gone to down in Littlehampton. Yep. And he'd written to me to say he'd met this beautiful young Italian woman, Italian English. I should meet her. So I went down to meet her, and she was very polite to me for about half an hour. And then she started telling me off, because I'd become a revolutionary Marxist, and she was saying we were all talking rubbish and all that stuff. So we spent a lot of time arguing, and then I met her on a few occasions. Then I fell out of contact with him, and 20 years later I see him on television, and he has become a multi-millionaire. Wow. He's become the guy who with his wife had started the Body Shop. And then I reconnected with him, and then a few years later he gave me the money to start the Big Issue. So it was extraordinary making this connection when I was really down when I was 20, and then reconnecting with him when I was 41 or 42.
Could the Big Issue have been started without Gordon?
A street paper was going to happen in the UK because there was one in America which was working with people in dire need, especially people coming out of prison. It was going to happen. Whether it would be better than the Big Issue, I don't know. I mean, we can't say. Whether somebody else might have put the money up, we can't say. But we made it a reality, largely because Gordon put his money where his mouth is,
Yep.
And he backed us. He backed me when people were saying, don't have anything to do with this ex-criminal, ex-Marxist, ex-offender, ex-this and the other, ex-racist. They said the guy's poison. But Gordon, he backed me, and in the end, we started the most successful social enterprise in the UK and spread it all over the world.
Fantastic. And how about the most unimaginable personal crisis that you ever encountered during your time at the Big Issue? Who came to you with the most tragic of stories, and you managed to turn their life around?
I think there were a number of there was this guy who I met who was probably one of the most mean-spirited, nasty, vicious, aggressive homeless persons I'd ever met. And he was a very big guy, and he used to frighten a lot of people, and he pushed people around. And he would come into our office and try and force his way to the front of the line. And one time I just said, look, get out. If you don't get out, we're going to throw you out. And it would have taken about 6 of us to throw him out. And then I'd said to him, look, if you want to be useful, why don't you go and help that guy out there in the street who's drunk, who's wet himself, who is going to be arrested very soon for drunk and disorderly. Why don't you go and sort him out? About 3 or 4 days later, I re-met this big, horrible guy, and he said, oh, I've sorted that guy out. And I said, what guy? because I was just trying to get rid of him. He said, the guy you told me to help. And I said, what have you? He said, well, I've got him somewhere to stay. He's sleeping in where I'm sleeping, under the bridge. I've got him sorted out with some food and all that stuff. And I said, but you're the one who's always going on about me, and now you're more concerned about him. He said, yeah. And I realised, it's like when people go on about homeless people and dogs. Dogs humanise people.
Sure.
When somebody has something, when a very, very dejected, broken person has something else to think about other than themselves, when they have somebody dependent on them, when they have somebody who looks to them for help, their spirit rises. And I find it really interesting. And when I saw this guy, Dougie, sort his life out, I thought it was the meanest, most callous person I'd ever met, most vicious person. And over the following few years, he turned into one of the best spirited people, because he stopped thinking about himself and he started thinking about others.
The other.
And I always say, if you really want to turn a person around, or you want to develop yourself, if you want to develop yourself as a human being, go and help somebody else. Stop thinking about yourself.
John, how has the big issue helped to achieve vendors' health, finance, housing and aspiration goals?
The way we work, we meet people with a package of problems.
Yep.
They've often got mental health problems, they've got physical health problems, they've got drink problems or drug problems, they've got problems of being unable to fit back into society. But the first thing we must do is stop them harming themselves and harming the community. That's not always possible. When people have drink and drug problems, they need deep help. What we do is we try and get them in line with programs. We get them into government programs, we get them into charity programs. And we begin to get together a group of people who can help them to help themselves. Because in the end, we present them with the opportunity of moving on, and if they don't move on, it's up to them. But the first thing we've got to do is get them looking after their own money. Because they're used to begging or sometimes robbing, we've got to get them saving their money, so we give them the chance of earning money, legal money, so that then they can start looking after their finances and start doing a bit of saving. We have a savings scheme. We're developing other savings schemes and other bank schemes. So we address them like that. The other thing that we try and do is we try and get them into a situation where they get accommodation, because it's much better to be off the streets than on the streets or in a hostel. So we tack into all of the reasons why they become homeless, and we tap into the ways in which we can get somebody back into society. But I'm not kidding myself, it is very, very difficult. It's difficult because most of the people that we meet have been around the block, they've been around the system, they have had things done against them, and they've added to that. They've added to the grief by doing things against themselves. Drink, cigarettes, smoking, poor quality food, too many coffees, too many hamburgers, too many, fast food. So there's a lot of things that need to be done, and unless we meet sympathetic other organisations, we can't do it ourselves. But we prepare them, and then we have a big issue foundation, and that foundation tries to move them on to the next stage. But overall, I would say it's a slow, steady process, and sometimes we don't get there. Sometimes the only thing we can do is stop them from feeling isolated, stop them from almost throwing their lives away, committing suicide, give them a sense of ownership.
Do you get a lot of those cases, John, suicide?
We do get people, a number of people have committed suicide who we've met. A number of people have thrown their lives away by ODing, drugs and all that stuff, or drunk too much. But overall, our biggest problem is how do we get somebody off the streets when we've managed to get them cleaned up a bit. And that is because there's not the money out there, there's not the support out there, and there's not the kind of government programs that need to be there.
With big issues operations all over the streets of London as well as the UK and all around the world, how do you manage all your vendors in a way that Starbucks would manage all of their outlets all around the world?
Well, we don't. The way the big issue works is that we help start publications in Japan, in Korea, in Australia, and various places like that, and we largely leave them to themselves. We sometimes put money into them, or we put skills and time, and so they're like franchises. But unlike most franchises, we then don't get paid for. We don't get their profits or whatever. So it's very much, in different countries it's run very, very successfully, not so successful in other countries. But we started something called the International Network of Street Papers, which works with virtually all of the street papers around the world. So it's a kind of loose liaison between various people. But I would say the future is about more working together rather than less. And I would say that within the next few years we will have more and more projects that will cross over, especially in and around the internet.
So on the subject of social enterprise as a whole, would you say that they're essentially businesses that have taken heart of a social mission, or are they actually fundamentally different to any kind of organization?
A social enterprise, social entrepreneurism should be about a business response to a social crisis.
Yep.
So therefore the important thing is that they don't simply hand out money to people in need. What they do is they try and get the people who are in the problem to be involved in their own solution. So the real argument is that it is a business, but it's a charitably intended business, or it is a charity, but with a business-like response to a social crisis. So it's a number of things. What I believe is it's the future, because I don't think charities by themselves work very well in sorting out social problems, and businesses don't work particularly well in sorting out some of the people that we meet on the streets.
What would you say are the main barriers, top 2 or 3 barriers for social enterprises? The big issue obviously being a notable exception from scaling and becoming household names.
The first barrier would be the fact that often people who enter social enterprise are not very good at defining their marketplace. So they say, look, here's a need, here's a terrible, terrible need, let's go and help. And then they find, you say, well, all right, now how are you going to help? What's your product? What's the form? Have you done your market research? Who else is in the marketplace ahead of you? All these sorts of things. They don't often get asked by a lot of social enterprise, because they're starting from an idealistic commitment to help.
Yep.
So if you do a kind of proper business plan, find out, here is the social problem. We looked at the problem of homelessness. How can we help the homeless? I know what we can help the homeless. What we can do is we can get them working. How can we get them working? Oh, over in New York there's a paper called Street News. Why don't we bring Street News to London, call it the big issue? So that's how we did it. So we looked at the problem, we looked at how we could help these people, and then we looked at, could we develop a product that people in the public could buy? And that is exactly how we did it. But we did our market research. The next thing is that often the people who get involved in social enterprises are not very good at packaging what they've got to sell. How many times do you buy something which is fair trade, which is appalling? I remember once buying some fair trade coffee for our office, and then noticing everybody was popping out to buy the coffee because they wouldn't drink the fair trade. So if you've got a fair trade mark or a social enterprise mark, make sure that what you're selling is as good, if not better, than what else is on offer. Why does it have to be poor quality? That's why we spend so much money on developing our street paper. We don't make it into a rag. We try and put all the great personalities of the age on the front cover so that the public say, oh yeah, we've got to have that.
The qualities that they must possess to run a successful social enterprise versus a for-profit enterprise.
Well, the same qualities that you would for any, if you're looking for senior managers, they've got to be people who know how to relate to other people in the team, they know how to work out budgets, they know how to do the kind of projects that are necessary to make the company work and profit. No different from if they went to work for IBM. I think a lot of the problems that one runs into is that sometimes you believe that you want them to have a big social conscience. I've worked with people with big social conscience who come to us and prove useless because they didn't have the skills. I'd rather have the skills, and I'd rather work on developing the social conscience.
Through Big Issue Invest, you're associated with impact investing. What are the biggest risks that impact investing is currently facing?
Well, the biggest thing in any form of investment at the moment is that it's all very, we don't know where the market's going. What we do is, a Big Issue Invest is a very simple thing. We get people putting money into us so that we can invest it in the well-being of society. So we try and do that in such a way that the impact of our efforts is maximised. But unfortunately it is a very difficult climate for every investor, and the money that we get, other people's money, other businesses' money, is always having to be, we're always having to think very seriously, will this work or will it not? And one has to become even more risk averse, which is an unfortunate situation.
You recently entered politics, well, not recently, but you've entered into politics, and what would you say would be your key priorities if you were made, for example, Prime Minister, and you've been quoted as saying that Great Britain is a democracy? Would you be able to explain that, please?
Yeah. If I was the Prime Minister, the first thing I would do is do an audit on government, because government is often very poorly run. Often government creates problems as well as solving them. If you look, for instance, at the criminal justice system, I had a meeting earlier with some people who train people in work while they're in prison, so when they come out they can stay out. It's very difficult getting money from governments to train people in prison so that when they're there they learn skills that when they get out they don't have to commit crime. Yep. So you've got to reinvent government. You've got to stop using the social security system as a way where you park up or warehouse people and you say, right, here's your money, go away and forget all about you. So government needs to be reinvented. It is appalling, and it's one of the reasons why we have so much crime and why we have so much poverty, is because the government is misusing our money, our budgets.
Yep.
The reason I call Britain a democracy is because after the Second World War, a guy called Lord Young, he wrote something called the coming age of meritocracies.
Yep.
And he invented the term the meritocrat.
Yep.
And then people were always going on that we live in a meritocratic society, so therefore the best people are at the top, and etc. And they don't really care about anybody else. But actually I do believe the world is run by a lot of dumb people. Mm-hmm. When you look at the people who run the financial markets, they're pretty dumb, because they take so many risks that actually, in the end, you know is going to come back and harm them. The health service is run by incredibly stupid people, because with 99% of their budget spent on responding to illness and only 1% on prevention, you'd have thought that the best way of spending your money is not to spend it once prevent the problem from happening. Yeah. The same goes for not just our prison systems, the same goes for our education system. We need to be training people to really grasp what is essential in the world. Most people who have an opinion on the financial markets and the recent financial crisis have absolutely no idea how financial markets work. They have no idea how credit works. They have why are we not teaching our children at school how the world works? We should be teaching children how the blood system circulates. We should be teaching them about the food that they put in their body, what they drink, so that we enter a period of a cognitive democracy, right. not a democracy. We need to be teaching our children how the world really works, and we need to be teaching them about politics, because the politics that we pass our children on are idealistic and dumb, and they're all based on what happened in the 19th century. We're still teaching children about the Second World War without ever explaining where the Second World War came from and why it still echoes down through the years. Education, in my opinion, in England is rubbish. Mm-hmm. The National Health Service is run by people who have no idea how to make us healthy, and our prison system is run by people who don't know how to reduce crime. That's why we live in a democracy.
Democracy. Okay, so on the subject of centuries, given that we're amidst and in the thick of a digital revolution right now, how would you say how is the big issue realigning its operations to move into the digital and mobile evolution/revolution?
We're launching a digital magazine which is about training up homeless people who sell the big issue into being correspondents and reporters for us. So we're moving people away from selling on the streets and becoming kind of local editors and becoming almost creators of very, very small online publications that all fit together. So we're moving with the times. It took us a long time to do this, and one of the principal reasons for that is because in this new world of digital awareness, everybody seems to give you very, very contradictory answers and all that. Yep. Now we're there. I mean, we are in a sense trying to create the new job for the homeless, and the new job for the homeless, so that he can become ex-homeless, is a digital way forward, and it is turning people into being digitally aware and ending the digital divide.
And would you ever move to a more paperless? I know I can't think of a model that would work for the big issue, but just given environmental, the whole sort of environmental movement, how would you move into that space?
I'm not in love with paper. I love paper books, but as a Kindle holder and an iPad holder and an AirBook holder, I assure you that I am nowhere near saying that the future has to be about paper. It will be paperless, and there'll come a time when, and I'm sure it's not too far, when you will be able to give somebody something in the streets even that will be paperless, and will have a limited amount of time, and all sorts of inventions. I like the idea of using digital technology to bring about social change, using your iPhone, using your iPad, and whatever.
Yeah. So the big issue has enormous star pull power now. You've got Justin Bieber on the cover. You've had Angelina Jolie, as well as the future King of England, Prince William, guest edit. How are these partnerships and celebrity endorsements and really impacted sales of the big issue?
Well, they impact sales because they keep us as a popular publication. We have always said that what we are is we're not a homeless publication, we're a publication sold by the homeless. So therefore our audience is you, me, and everybody else. That is the most important thing for us. That's why we have to keep up with the Angelina Jolies. That's why we have to follow the popularities that are out there, and that sometimes annoys people because they think the magazine should be more about homelessness, and if it was, we'd get probably 3,000 copies sold a week rather than the hundreds and thousands that we sell.
Succession planning, John. Any plans to pass the baton on to a future John Bird?
I would love to meet a future John Bird. There's not many of us around, largely because when you get somebody who comes from the problem, poverty and all that, and then they get out, and then they become a part of the solution, one very rarely meets those people who have developed the kind of skills that I've developed over the years. I'm desperate to meet somebody, old, young, rich, poor, I don't care, who, male or female, who can carry on with the kind of work that we need. But you need passion, but you also need common sense. And one thing you can't be is sentimentally attached to the poor. If every time you see a poor person you start crying, then go and work with a charity. But every time you see a poor person you say opportunity for change. That's what it's all about. I would love, there's many things I want to do. I draw and I paint. I've been drawing and painting since I went to art school when I left boys' prison. I would love to be out drawing trees and naked women, and I could spend my whole life doing that. But unfortunately I've got another job to do.
Yep. One word to describe yourself.
Comic.
Okay.
I see the comedy in everything. I see the comedy in life, and I think I use comedy for social change.
The greatest lesson you ever learned from a homeless person?
The greatest lesson I ever learned from a homeless person was to not glorify the poor and not glorify the homeless who feel sorry for themselves. Be very, very straightforward with them. Be like a doctor who arrives at the scene of an accident and doesn't want to engage with the person, just wants to save them from dying.
When a movie is made about your life, what would be the pivotal moment, the cathartic moment, or the I'm king of the world moment?
I think the greatest moment will be for me when at age 21 I got rid of all the poison that had been poured into my head as a baby, and I kept for 21 years. It was the most wonderful. When you actually stop being a racist and stop being a blamer of other people, looking for who to blame, I think it's the most wonderful thing. I am an anti-moralist. I hate people who moralize. I don't define myself by the failures of others, and I think it's largely to do with what happened to me when I was 21, when I met a beautiful, elegant Trotskyist girl who turned me into a Marxist.